charitable challenges and opportunities, dissolutions, transactions, and restricted funds. If you are one of our clients or have actually been to any one of our seminars or webinars, I can almost guarantee that I've either referred you to their website, linked you to their guide for charity board members, or literally handed you one of their pamphlets. So they are a wonderful resource for nonprofits in our community, and we're really excited to have them join us today. What I would really like to do before we get started is I will try to shorten it as much as I can, just tell you a little bit more about Pro Bono Partnership of Ohio. Our mission is powered by attorney volunteers, strengthen our community by providing free business legal services and education to nonprofits. We're actually the third pro bono partnership nationally. We were established in the Cincinnati and Dayton areas in 2014. Our clients have to be 501c3 public charities, serving low income or disadvantaged individuals, having programs that are already having a demonstrable impact on our community. Our clients have to be located in or serving the Cincinnati and Dayton areas, and they have to be unable to pay for legal services. We actually offer a broad range of legal assistance for our clients, from real estate, board responsibilities, fiduciary duties, governance, intellectual property, employment, really you name it, anything that we have attorneys volunteering through us and they have the subject matter expertise for, we will help our clients out. The only thing that we do not touch is litigation. So to become a client, nonprofits fill out a request for legal assistance. I have heard that it takes about 20 minutes to do so on our website. We will screen each applicant, and if you qualify, we'll help you identify some initial legal issues. And once you're accepted, we continue to work with you. We identify other legal issues, we coordinate each pro bono project. Some of the things that our clients can expect from us is quality legal services. We have experienced company and law firm attorneys working with us and sharing their time and expertise for free. PBPO attorneys that are skilled in the area of tax-exempt law and nonprofit law are there to help you identify areas of risk for your organization and really discuss best practices. Like we mentioned before, we place every matter with a subject matter expert, and we oversee each matter. What we hear the most from the nonprofit community, from the legal perspective, is we don't know what we don't know. And so we've really focused at PBPO on educational outreach to all nonprofits, not just our clients. We believe that to make our community better, we need thriving nonprofits, and we're here to make sure that you have a very strong foundation so you can continue doing the great work that you do well into the future. So to that end, we provide low-cost or free in-person seminars and webinars. We believe in the power of collaboration. We love collaborating with our community partners like the Bar Association, One Source Leadership Council, Dayton Metro Library. There are many others. We gear our programming towards nonprofit leaders and board members on a wide range of topics. And if you sign up for our mailing list, you'll receive our pro bono brief, which are really short, concise articles that we try to hit some major legal issues that are really important and applicable to our clients. So here's our information. We're happy to share that with you as well later. We wouldn't be lawyers without having a disclaimer before each presentation. We're just providing general advice today and not legal advice. We encourage you to contact your attorney, and if that's us, feel free to contact us if you have any specific questions to your organization. Just some housekeeping, there's a Q&A box. Feel free to type questions that you have for our presenters in there. We just ask that you keep them general, and hopefully they're applicable to many of the other nonprofits that are online today. If there's anything specific about your organization, we may not be able to get to it. So that said, I would love to introduce our speakers today from the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Law Section. Matt Halandoni is the Assistant Section Chief for the section. He coordinates the section's probate and institutional fund matters. Abby Jacobs is an attorney in the Charitable Law Section. She focuses on nonprofit transactions, mergers, and charitable registration issues. And Beth Short handles outreach and education for the section. Her work focuses on the development of strategies aimed at strengthening the nonprofit sector. Matt, Abby, and Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. I'm a huge fan of the Pro Bono Partnership. You guys do wonderful work, and you make a big difference for all the charities that you serve. So we're thankful to do things collaboratively once in a while. I thought that it could be helpful if, let me see if I can share my screen. I wanted to just show everybody our webpage, because all the information that we go over today, I wanted you to know how to find it later on. So we have our brand new website that has just charitable information that's not part of the larger Attorney General's webpage. We got feedback that people had troubles finding, amidst everything there, information that was pertinent to the charitable community. So you can find our webpage now at charitable.ohioago.gov. Again, that's charitable@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. We're going to be talking about some decisions that some charities have to make given changes in the charitable community and coronavirus. And you'll be able to refer back to that information in a couple of different places on our webpage. So under the charity registration tab, you'll be able to find information about how to properly dissolve a charity in the state of Ohio. It's under closing a charity in Ohio. You'll also be able to find information about charitable transactions and probate and restricted fund issues that we're also going to cover. And that's in a separate little box, a breakout box here on the webpage that you can go back to and find references to the forms and statutory provisions that both Matt and Abby will be mentioning as we go. But I also want to call your attention to a number of resources that we have for charities that I think are great for all charity board members to know about. We're particularly interested in making sure that charitable leaders have tools to know what the legal obligations are when you're serving as a board member, because failure to pay attention to those can really jeopardize the long-term viability of the organization. So we have a number of publications and resources that deal with that. And we also have webinars that are both recorded and live, so you can participate in live webinars on the charitable registration system, on board governance. We also have bingo school. We do license bingo in the state of Ohio, but we also have recorded versions that you can watch at any time of the day or night. If you're having trouble sleeping, you can listen to me talk about conflict of interest at 2 in the morning. So we tried to help good people do good things the right way, and wanted you to know where you would be able to find the information we're covering today later on. I also wanted to let you know about how to contact us. The best way to get a hold of the charitable law section is to use our email address, and our general email address is charitableLaw, all one word, @ohioattorneygeneral.gov. So it's charitableLaw@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. And while we can't provide legal advice for charities, like all of Barca's volunteer lawyers can do, we can try to point you in the right direction. So I wanted to start out making sure that people understood what some of the options are for tracking down additional resource information. So let's get started, and I'm going to maybe stop sharing my screen and start asking some questions. And I'm having troubles making that work. But let's jump into things. And Abby, I'm going to turn to you first. You know, every day in America for the last how many years, charities start and charities go out of business every day in America. But we've had some really challenging times lately, and there will be a number of charities that aren't able to survive the economic troubles that the entire coronavirus situation has created for people. So I wondered if you could talk about some of the issues that board members should be discussing and considering when they're thinking about maybe they ought to just dissolve and go out of business. There are a lot of details to think about, and board members need to make sure that it's done in the proper way. Could you kind of share some of those with our audience?
Sure. So first of all, the obvious, which is that boards need to be constantly monitoring your organization's situation, right? So you should be meeting regularly, talking about what steps you might need to take. And if in those discussions you decide that the organization needs to close, which is unfortunately, as Beth said, happening to more and more charities and businesses right now, then there are a bunch of things you need to think about. And you need to be very thoughtful about how you shut down your organization. And so often folks think that once they've decided to shut down and close their organization, that they're done and their duties are over. But as it turns out, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to do that's very, very important at the end of the charity's life. And so first, you need to decide who's going to be responsible for winding down the charity's activities. Are you going to continue to pay them or not? Can you afford to do that? Or are folks going to volunteer to do that? Who's going to distribute the assets? Where do the assets go? Who's going to close the bank accounts? Who's going to file the dissolution documents with the Secretary of State and the final 990 with the IRS and the final annual report with our office? So there are, a whole bunch of things to think about and a whole bunch of things that need to be done to properly shut down the charity. And it's important to remember that it is a breach of your legal obligations, a breach of your fiduciary duties not to do these things. You can't just run away with the money, for example. That's more than just a breach of your fiduciary duties. And so you need to make sure that you're doing with the assets what you're required to do with the assets. And so how do you even know what you're required to do with the assets? That's a question we often get. So the first thing you need to do is you need to look at your governing documents. So more than likely in your articles of incorporation and maybe also in your bylaws, it'll tell you where your assets need to go. And so you need to make sure that that's where the assets are distributed. If you haven't covered that in specificity in your articles or bylaws, you can look at Revised Code Chapter 1702, my favorite. Section 0.49 specifically will tell you how you have to apply those assets. And basically what it says is charitable assets are always charitable assets. So you can't run away with them. You can't give them to some unrelated for-profit organization. You can't give them to some charitable organization that's completely off track with what you do, probably. So that's something to check out for sure.
So it sounds like a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to consider before you get to that point of deciding to go out of business. It's been hard times for charities all across the state of Ohio, and we've done 2 statewide surveys of charities in which they've shared information with us about the economic hardships, the challenges in fundraising. So sometimes rather than going out of business, and we decided to start with the bad news first about going out of business, boards may consider other options to respond to what have definitely been hard times. And so sometimes they've decided that in order to be more cost effective, then maybe they ought to look for a partner to merge with another organization that does similar work, and that can bring some cost savings by reducing administrative costs. It's never easy to have board members come together and decide to merge. What are some tips you might have for board members when that's what's on the table?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a little better to talk about, right? So you're not shutting down, you're just deciding to change things up a little bit and partner with someone else. So if you're deciding to partner with another organization, there's 2 ways that it sort of comes about. You can either merge together into one organization merges into the other, basically, or you can consolidate where the 2 of you come together and you create an entirely new organization. There are reasons to do either of those things depending on your situation. And you'll want to talk to counsel about that for sure. and discuss that as a board. But some of the things you'll need to think about no matter what you're doing is at least one, maybe both of your organizations are going to be dissolving. So all of the things we just talked about, that apply if you're shutting down your organization, would apply here. So in a merger situation, one entity is becoming part of the other entity. So that entity that's disappearing basically needs to do all of that dissolution stuff. In a consolidation, both organizations will need to do that stuff. But besides the dissolution stuff that we've already talked about, there are a bunch of other things you'll need to think about. So it's often hard for organizations to decide to do this because both boards need to be on board with everything that's happening, right? So not only do you need to be meeting as a single board, the boards need to meet with each other to negotiate how it's going to look. For example, how are staffing and programming going to continue to work? Who will continue to be employed? What kinds of programming activities will you do? Will they change? How will they change? So if your programming activities aren't 100% aligned and have some differences, you're going to have to think about how that changes for you. And as a result, you may need to change your governing documents. You probably do anyway. Will the surviving organization or the new organization want to change its name or add a DBA? If so, you'll need to file that with all sorts of people, our office, the IRS, and the Secretary of State. You'll also probably need to notify places like your bank, for example. And if you're deciding to merge or consolidate, the forms that you'll need are on the Ohio Secretary of State's website. So their website is very user-friendly. It's pretty easy to find these forms, but that's where you'd go to find the forms to actually do the merger or consolidation through like the corporate structure part of it. There's also, oh yeah, so the citation for it, where you can find it in the statute is 1702.41. And you can also call us. We do review some mergers, although very few. So if your organization is a 501c3 that is merging with a for-profit or a C4 or some non-501c3, then you need to let us know, but that's a pretty rare occurrence.
There are a lot of details whenever you're talking about merging organizations, and a lot of things the boards need to sort through, like the debts of each organization, personnel and staff, what kind of benefits you bring together. During the economic crisis of 2008, there were a lot of predictions early on that there would be many mergers in the charitable world, and that didn't turn out to be quite the case because it's very hard work to merge two organizations. And often, rather than legal issues getting in the way, what seems to be the biggest impediment sometimes is ego and turf. Kind of the personal human dynamic sometimes interferes, and it's bound to. But during these times, if you care a lot about serving your communities, this may end up being the best decision for those that rely on your organization. So stick with it. It's often best to have counsel guiding this process. A lot of things to maneuver, a lot of business issues, a lot of community service and communications issues connected with it, and then a lot of legal details to take care of. Abby, another method that we've seen some charities using is maybe they're not going out of business, thankfully. They're able to continue doing services. They're not going to merge, but they may have some assets, maybe a certain operational program, maybe a building or other sort of assets that they decide they want to dispose of or sell off in order to continue providing their core services. How does that happen? What do boards need to think about in those areas? And I know they may need to be communicating with our office about those kinds of transactions.
That's right. So first and foremost, organizations need to consider whether or not they want to hire counsel. Counsel is not required. You don't have to hire an attorney to do these kinds of transactions, but depending on how sophisticated the transaction is, how much money the property is worth, that kind of stuff, it's something you'll really want to consider. It will probably make it much easier for you. But yes, so organizations need to let us know if they're disposing of 50% or more of their assets in a 3-year period. Basically, that boils down to almost always like selling off a big building or something like that. So those are the situations where this really comes into play. And so if it's the case that you're going to sell off a bunch of your assets, 50% or more, you need to let us know. There's a notification form on our website where Beth showed you. And you submit that to us, and we will send a records request for all sorts of documents to make sure that there's not any big conflict of interest issues, fiduciary duty violations, and that you, the charity, are getting fair market value. So we want to make sure that you're not selling off an asset that's worth $1 million and you're selling it for $100,000 to a for-profit organization who's basically taking advantage of you. Or maybe you as the board members are planning to run away with a bunch of that money. That wouldn't be good, or give it away to your family members, that kind of stuff. So that's what we look for in those kinds of situations, but they tend to go pretty smoothly. Organizations typically aren't trying to run away with the money. And so, yes, you need to let us know, though, 50% or more of your assets.
Yeah, so conflict of interest issues can be so important because selling a downtown property under fair market value to one of your board members, that can end up leading everyone into hot water, which we want to avoid. And it may well be that we see a lot more of these kinds of transactions due to coronavirus, since many charities, including government workers, we've made alternate arrangements to work from home and work remotely. And many charities and businesses are reconsidering whether they actually need as big of a footprint in terms of owning property. So there may be some buildings that folks have learned that we can provide services just as effectively doing it virtually and in other ways. So that may be a common approach that some boards take, is selling off office facilities. And that's the sort of transaction that would require the kind of attention that Abby outlined. Now to Matt. Some organizations are lucky enough to have reserve funds on hand. Some of those may be just reserve funds or endowments, and sometimes boards can make decisions about how to use those monies. And based on the statewide surveys that we've done of charities, a number of organizations are drawing down on their reserves to cover some of their operational costs that they're encountering these days. But there are limitations to what boards can do with the monies that they have been entrusted with. Can you talk about things, please, that board members ought to be very careful about when we're talking about that issue?
Sure. Thanks, Beth. And I think before we kind of talk about the different types of things that boards can do, it's important to really understand the different types of funds that your organization may have. So what we're really focusing on is what are known as institutional funds. And so that's defined by statute as a fund that's held by an institution, charitable institution, exclusively for charitable purposes. And so there's two types. There's unrestricted and restricted. Unrestricted is just as it sounds. It's you can use that for any general charitable purpose of your institution. So it can be used for operations. It can be used for any specific projects. It's a fairly flexible pot of money, but it has to be unrestricted and expressly unrestricted in order for you to be able to use it like that. On the other hand, you often have lots of different types of restricted funds, and so restricted funds have some type of caveat that it can only be used for a certain purpose. And there are different ways that those funds became restricted in the first place. Oftentimes, those restrictions are imposed by the organization itself. It's a board restriction. The board came to a conclusion that this restriction was important to preserve the fund or to maximize investment, maximize the impact that it can have for the organization. So things like a board's investment policy or spending policy, you'll spend no more than 4% or 5% of a fund's fair market value in any given year. Sometimes those restrictions are a result of the way that those funds were received or solicited for. So if there's a specific type of campaign, most of the time we think of the church needs a new building, or, the community center needs to get built, or we need to build a new playground. So we're raising funds for that specific purpose. Maybe you've got some left over once the project's completed. Can you just use that money for other charitable purposes? That's a factual question and a potential legal question of what you can do with that. Most of the time, though, those restrictions that you have come from the donor, and it's often thought of through gifts, or either while the donor is still alive, or maybe it comes from a donor's estate. And so, you have a situation where, a donor passes away, and in their will or in their trust document, they leave certain money to your institution. It could say something: the remainder of my estate will go to this foundation to establish the John and Betty Smith Memorial Scholarship Fund. And then on top of that, there's further restriction that says only the income from this fund shall be used to fund scholarships for students from Hamilton County, Montgomery County, wherever you're from, attending a four-year college, studying nursing. It can get rather deep in how detailed those restrictions are. So what the board needs to keep in mind when they have these bequests or these gifts is it feasible to maintain these restrictions? Because once you take that money, it comes with all the strings that you have along with it. So it's very important that the board fully understands, the organizations fully understand that not all money is string free, and if you do agree to take it for those purposes that are outlined in the restriction, that you adhere to them, because our office is often involved in complaints, investigations, potential cases that are related to a charity not fulfilling a restriction imposed by a donor.
And it's really important for charities to think about those strings that come with gifts and whether they're really willing to accept them with those conditions, because once you take them, you've bought the entire package, haven't you?
Pretty much. Now, there are ways that you can modify those restrictions or potentially release those restrictions. For those board designated funds, those board imposed restrictions, depending on the bylaws of your organization, it might take a vote of the board to go ahead and change that policy or remove that restriction. However, if those restrictions are as a result of a donor imposed restriction, there are certain ways in statute to change that. The easiest way is, if your donor is still alive, is to go back to your donor, discuss with them the modification or the relief that your organization is contemplating, and get that donor's written consent. Now, that has to come directly from the donor, him or herself, not from the representative of their estate, not from any family members or heirs. It has to come directly from that donor. A lot of times the donor's already passed on, and so you're kind of left with, what do we do now? How do we change this restriction? And there's other ways within that statute. And that statute is Ohio Revised Code 1715.55, and it talks about the 4 ways you can change or modify an institutional fund. So the first one is that donor's written consent. In the event the donor is not there, you can go and petition, usually the probate court in whatever county that your organization is in, wherever you're holding that fund, to make that modification. And the reason that you have to give the court for changing that fund is because the use of that fund, that restriction, has become impractical, impossible, or unlawful. And the third way you can do it for certain types of funds is through a notification procedure with our office. Now, those funds have to have a select criteria. They have to be under $250,000, and greater than 10 years old. So, and whatever the use that you intend to use those funds for has to be consistent with the charitable purposes that the donor laid out in the gift instrument, if there is one. And so Beth showed you around our website a little bit. There's a link at the bottom there to forms in that charitable transactions and probate section. There's a form there. It'll say modifications or notification under revised code 171555. You click on that form, you download that form, you fill it out, and then you send it into our office by mail. And then once we get that form, we have 60 days to review what the requested modification is before you can take action on it. And usually, as soon as we get it, we'll contact whoever the point of contact is on that form. You know, if we need more information, we'll ask for it. We ask that when you do send that in, that you include the gift instrument if you have it, any other documentation showing what that donor's intent was, whether that's some kind of correspondence you have with the donor, or maybe you know, news articles, whatever, about what the donor intended to do with their money. And also documentation showing that the circumstances have changed such that you need to change that fund. So the types of situations we have are, you know, often come with schools, colleges, education. Somebody leaves a scholarship fund for the, you know, geology department. Well, the geology department was closed 30 years ago, and so this money's been sitting with the school. They haven't been able to use it because we have no geology department. We want to be able to use it for the earth sciences department or some other similar purpose. So we'll take a look. We'll review what the requested modification is, and we'll let you know whether our office objects to that, whether we don't object to it, at which point you can go ahead and modify the fund, or we might need additional information, and we'll ask for an additional 60 days for review. In the event that our office says we don't think that the new purpose or the proposed purpose is consistent with the donor's intent, we object to the modification. That doesn't necessarily stop the process for the institution. They can still go to the probate court and ask for that modification. Now, our office is a necessary party to those actions. So if you file a petition in court, you'll have to name our office as a party. And so we'll work that out with the probate court as well.
So there's a process set up for smaller funds to just go through our office rather than the hassle of going to court for a legal proceeding. But if you're lucky enough to have bajillions of dollars in those kinds of accounts, then the probate court is going to have to weigh in. And what we're interested in doing in most of these cases is looking for the next best use of those funds that still meets the general area of interest for the donor. Is that how we kind of view whether it's an appropriate use?
Right. So we need to see that the whatever the use set out by the donor, that the institution agreed to adhere to, no longer is possible. So if it's, you know, this money is supposed to be invested in a community center and the community center is closed, you know, can we use it for a different community center nearby? Are there any other similar purposes that we can use it for? Sometimes we get requests, you know, again, kind of the school context, you know, we want to change the scholarship use from this department to this department. Well, if the original department is still there, even if there's only a couple students majoring in that discipline, we're going to say, well, you still have a music department. So that money, even though there's a lot of money and it'll go for more than what can be used, you have to first try to fulfill that original restriction, and then potentially, if it's maybe the money could be used by other students, we'll look at that modification for the remainder.
So if the funds are restricted to find a cure to cancer and we manage to find a cure to cancer, then we'll be thinking about, what's the next best use, since that hurdle has already been accomplished by mankind. Sometimes those questions are not always very clear, the next best use, and there's some conflict that develops over that once in a while, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard also to determine what the donor specifically wanted, because maybe this gift was given many years ago before the organization started keeping good records. Maybe there's just this pot of money that you have no idea how it got there. It's just always been there, and we've used it for XYZ purpose. And so, yeah, it is difficult, and sometimes we get into conflict with organizations over our interpretation of what the fund was for. And honestly, in kind of the, I mean, this is always kind of an issue, but especially we've seen it in the last year or so with the pandemic and the economy being the way that it has been, the downturn, that organizations are struggling and they're kind of wondering, well, we have these endowment funds that were used for this, are supposed to be used for this purpose, but we might need that to keep our organization afloat. And what we have to look at when we're asked to review those modifications is, how strict is the language of the donor's intent? Does he say only used for XYZ purpose, or does it give the organization a little bit of flexibility to use those funds for more general purposes? What kind of information do we have about the donor's affinity for that organization, and would that donor rather see the money go somewhere else or go to that organization to kind of keep it afloat? We've seen that happen, and we've had to make kind of those interpretations and tough decisions in the last year or so.
Yeah, and I think that given these economic challenges that we're all seeing from different perspectives, there might be a temptation for board members to look at some of their pots of restricted monies and think that that holds the key for filling some of their current bills. If you're an arts organization that has a restricted fund for scholarships to send local young people to a national theater camp each year, and we know arts organizations are having a rough time, that may not be the way to continue paying your expenses on that theater based on how that restriction is written. So it sounds as if it's kind of a case-by-case situation to determine exactly what the restriction is and what the situation is.
Right, Beth. And like Abby said about some of the transactions and dissolutions, I'd recommend that you talk to your counsel before you make any of those decisions. And that counsel, while we can't give legal advice per se, we are kind of the experts in the field, and a lot of time counsel will reach out to us and just kind of run some situations by us, and we can kind of give them our thoughts on what we've seen and what the proper process is.
Well, we did get a question here, and I think it's from perhaps one of the pro bono lawyers with the organization, and I have a feeling it's going to be hard to answer. So this person is asking, say you represent a nonprofit that's been dissolved. Former treasurer gets notified that probate court has a case with a bequest. Would that bequest to the now defunct organization, would it lapse, or would it go to the successor nonprofit where the assets have been transferred and essentially absorbed the mission of that defunct organization? How does that work?
Well, this is a situation where you would usually see the executor of the estate, either through the estate proceeding itself or through a separate, maybe declaratory action, asking the court to use there's a legal theory procedure called cypre, which is if the original charitable purpose is no longer available, the probate court has the jurisdiction in the state of Ohio to change it to as we talked about, whatever is the most similar thing available. We get these types of cases all the time. You know, the XYZ church, so-and-so left money to St. Mark's Lutheran Church. St. Mark's closed shop a few years ago. The next closest church is St. James, or maybe it goes to the diocese or the more regional organization. And so, you know, the court will ultimately make that determination. Usually what happens is council says, we think this is the next best organization. They submit it to our office. You know, we give them our thoughts, whether we agree or disagree. If we agree, we file something with the court saying all parties agree that that the new organization, the successor organization, is the appropriate beneficiary of that bequest.
And sometimes I believe that we run into situations where we'll have counsel from competing organizations go to court and say, it ought to be us. No, it ought to be us. So it's very fact specific in each of these situations.
Right, absolutely.
And then the lesson for most of us is, even though times are tough, don't think you can be using restricted funds to plug some of your current holes without, you know, thinking through very carefully what those restrictions were.
Yeah. There are definitely consequences for doing that. You know, whether we find out through the dissolution documents that you know that Abby was talking about, or whether there's complaints either from the donor, the donor's family, you know, alumni of the organization, or former members, etc. We've had that type of situation come up a few times also.
It's a bad thing. You know, it's a breach of the board member's duties. And it also just can set up a bad faith situation where it looks as if your organization can't be trusted to live up to promises that you make to those that support your organization. So, you know, do the right thing. I don't see any other questions that have come up, Barca. So I think we covered some of the stranger situations that may arise during COVID, where charities are taking, you know, strong strategic looks at how to best respond to these challenges. And so I take a look at our webpage and you'll find references to all the issues that both Abby and Matt spoke about. And again, if you don't find an answer there, and if you think that we can help you out more directly, email us at charitablelaw@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. So thank you, Barca. Thank you, Pro Bono Partnership. And thank you all for tuning in. And most especially, thank you for the work that you're doing to make our community stronger. We appreciate it very much.